Well, welcome everybody to the first DSS Speaker of the Year, and delighted to have Doug Parker here. Doug is a longtime supporter of the school, an alum from what we often call the great class of '86.
That's what we call it.
It's a great class. It's an amazing group of people with lots of really interesting career trajectories that came out of that class of '86. So there are plenty of other '86ers that have been through this building over the years, sharing with us. But Doug's been on our Board of Visitors for years and is on Vanderbilt's Board of Trust. Now recently appointed to a new subcommittee on that Board of Trust that focuses on equity, diversity, and inclusion, something that we're, of course, very focused on as a university and school. And he has some other Owen alum with him on that committee. Cindy Kent, I think, is on that same committee, part of also the Board of Trust. And some of you have heard her speak. She was here through in the spring. But anyways, we've got a lot of great questions from all of you. And we're, of course, on Zoom here live right now, but we're also recording this. So we'll be able to post it out for later folks if they miss it. If somebody, misses it, just tell them it'll be there. And really, I just to give you a little bit of background, I mean, of course, Doug's career has been in the airline industry. And I feel like you've been almost at every airline at some point in time, but it's not true, right? There's some notable exceptions. But
a lot.
In that trajectory was US Air, America West, Northwest, any others?
American.
An American, of course, right, yeah, of course, American.
Yeah.
Really a spectacular, fascinating career in an industry that, of course, has been hugely impacted, and one that has a history of kind of boom and bust. So this isn't Doug's first rodeo of some challenges in the economy that impacts transportation. But I reached out to Doug earlier this summer because of kind of a funny incident. We were, as a school at that time, planning for the fall, thinking about our summer reading, and we all read How to Be an Anti-Racist and have done a number of sessions around that as we came back to school. But one of the things that caught my eye was that Doug had been on an interesting kind of journey on a Southwest flight and had a very interesting interaction with a flight attendant, I think, on Southwest as part of a book that he was reading, a very related book called White Fragility. It's actually one that we considered reading for our summer reading because in many ways covers a lot of the same kind of topics, but maybe from a slightly different angle. But anyways, I thought I'd start with that, Doug.
Sure.
I mean, were you surprised by the immediate tension that came out of that ride on Southwest and that discussion you had?
Oh yeah. I mean, it was never intended to be public. I'll try and just relate it briefly to people that didn't see it. It did get a lot of coverage. I ended up. I needed to get from Dallas to Panama City, Florida, for family reasons. I waited too long to make my reservation, so American was actually full. Now this is, I don't know when this was, but sometime early, I think late May. So post-pandemic. We're not flying a lot, but there is demand to places like beaches, so our flights are full. I end up buying a ticket on Southwest. I wasn't too excited about people, certainly in the airline industry, know me, so I wasn't too excited about being seen flying on Southwest. So, fortunately, though, it was a mask, so I'm wearing a mask. No one recognizes me. I had brought with me this book, White Fragility. Because one of our board members, an African-American board member, had recommended it to me. I'd been reading it. Pandemic hit, I stopped reading it, and just went into crisis mode. And then the George Floyd incident happens, and so I'm like, as I'm packing for that trip, I'm like, I've got to get that book back out and finish it. So anyway, I'm carrying the book, walk past the flight attendant, go back, sit in my seat in Southwest, minding my own, and sitting in my seat, honestly didn't put the book in the seat back pocket, started sending emails back in work mode. And we're nearing descent, and all of a sudden I noticed, the flight attendant, a black flight attendant who was working the front of the cabin, I'm well in the back, is now seated next to me. I'm in the window seat, she's sitting in the aisle seat, she just sits down and I look over and go, I've been outed, she knows who I am. But she just looks at me, she goes, how's that book? And I said, oh, it's really, and I get pretty defensive. I'm like, it's really good. It talks about, I'm just trying to learn, and this book talks about how the issue is, we need to have better conversations. We need to have frank conversations about racism in America, and particularly those of us that are white. And as I start to say that, she looks at me and she just says, well, she goes, I'm just trying to learn too. And then she starts crying. And anyway, it was, and we had a nice, 10, 15-minute conversation. She explained to me that she'd been, it was hard for her to come to work. And one of the morals of the story, by the way, you would never, this woman just, I walked right past her. I had no idea what she was going through. She's greeting everybody. She's happy as can be, seems happy as can be, but she's got this going on inside her. And she said, I saw you with that book and something told me to come talk to you. So anyway, so we talked for a while. Nice conversation, and then as it's kind of wrapping up, I say, "What's your name?" She tells me her name's Jock Ray Hill, and I say, "Well, I'm Doug Parker," and I felt compelled to tell her what I did, lest she ever find out. So I said, "I'm the CEO of American Airlines." She says, "Oh my gosh, my mom works for you." So her mom works for us. I mean, these connections are just unbelievable. And then she starts crying again. She reaches over and gives me a hug. So we had masks on. And anyway, so that's the encounter, and it was profound. It was profound for me. It was exactly what I needed. So that in and of itself was enough. She went and posted the story to Facebook, to her Facebook account, which had, but and at the same time, I had been so taken by, I'd written a note to all of our officers about the encounter. But again, not in any means trying to do anything other than that. It was just a lesson for all of us, and we do that. We'll send notes to each other about learning experiences. So anyway, I had sent a note. She put her Facebook note out. This again, this is right in the aftermath of the George Floyd incident. And companies are putting out these statements about, here's what we think at American Airlines, and our team had written one. A really good one about what we're going to do at American. But our head of corporate communications reads my note. She goes, that note's better than what we sent. We should send that to the entire company about your encounter. And it's like, well, that seems kind of strange, but okay. But she was right. It was much more human, much more about and much more authentic. So anyway, the combination of those two things, her Facebook was much more what got it going than my note. But we had the two exact same stories with different perspectives, and it just, I don't know, it got picked up. But anyway, so that's the story. I was surprised it got that much attention. But what I know is this: it got that much attention because of what I do. That's the exact same encounter could have happened and probably did happen in other places. And the only reason this got the attention it got is because of my job, and that's a responsibility for me. And the other part of the story that I like is I wasn't the one who started the conversation. She did. She's the brave one. Jock Ray is the one who had the courageous conversation and initiated the courageous conversation. So shame on me, because one, I have the ability to make change, and two, I'm not using it. She's the one who had to initiate the conversation without any idea. So anyway, it's been a great learning experience for me. I think about it every day. I'm working really hard to make sure that we don't forget it. We're really proud of what we've done at American in terms of diversity, inclusion, and equality, but we need to do more, and we know it. And this story has helped us, and hopefully it seems to have helped others. So it's fantastic.
That's great. Well, certainly, I mean, as the summer has worn on, this topic is just front and center in our minds, and we're watching Wisconsin this week, and it feels like, oh my gosh, here we are again, back to this conversation and the painful reality of the injustices that exist. How has, reading that book, these kinds of experiences, how do you take that back to American? What does that look like to be a anti-racist CIO at American?
Yeah. Again, therein lies a challenge, of course. I mean, it's one thing, and what the books will tell you, is so much of what we do. Even those of us that consider ourselves progressive and would never even think of ourselves as being described as racist, we perpetuate the structure that perpetuates the systemic racism, and we can maybe unknowingly, but we do, and then we have to make changes. So that's what we've decided. It starts within the corporation by looking within. We have. In addition to everything we were already doing, which again we were really proud of, it just was insufficient. But in addition to all the HBCU recruiting and we were one of the first companies to put in place unconscious bias training for every team member. So we'd already done those things, but it clearly wasn't enough. We've gone out and re-upped and said, put out a plan to the whole team. So one, we're going to have conversations like these, and we've begun those, which are phenomenal. And setting up panels, community panels as well, to help us understand better. Two, education. We did have the unconscious bias training, but we're going to make it a better, more specific training program for everyone. But then third, and probably most importantly, is we got to be intentional about development of the recruitment and development of Black professionals in the organization. So, and we're going to do all those things and measure it and make sure we're doing that, not just measure the results, not just measure the outcomes as opposed to just the actions. So we're going to do all those things, and that's within. We got to take care of our own house, but we also, again, from my perspective, we as corporate America need to be doing what we can to influence what is going on in our country, and there are a lot of us working to do that. But we need, we lobby for tax reform. We should be lobbying for police reform, judicial reform, education reform, medical reform, breaking down all these systemic racism barriers that exist, and working really hard to do that. So we got a lot of work to do.
Yeah.
But it's top of mind. It's top of the list, even in a crisis. We are making sure that we're working through all these things, and I think it's imperative we all do so.
Absolutely. Well, it's no different at the Owen School for sure. And Owen, while it was born diverse, in 1969, the very first class had African Americans, had women, international students. It was in some ways kind of unique among a lot of business schools. There are a lot of the proud, wonderful business schools that started out as male only or, were segregated or whatnot. And yet, we still have so many issues that we're working on. And one of the things we're really excited about this year is some new curriculum that we've been building out around our human resources concentration, around diversity, managing diverse teams and so forth. And also around some of this structural bias, structural economic systems that really perpetuate racism. Right. So lots of neat things, but we have a lot of work to do too. So yep. we're all in it together.
Well, good for you.
I guess one of the things I certainly wonder in your particular case, and this is true for all of us, really is when you think about prioritizing CSR related things, diversity, inclusion, and other things in tough times, that may be even harder. It's sometimes hard to do in good times, and there's always a huge debate in business school environments around CSR and what it means for shareholders and how you really kind of prioritize it in a way that makes economic sense. And these things get debated on and on and on in the business school world. But you're where the rubber meets the road, and in tougher times, how do you kind of keep that going? Caitlin Wilson, one of our students, wondered what that meant for you.
For all these issues, it's so easy in a crisis. Well, it's not. It shouldn't be easy, but one can tend to just to revert to, okay, this is a crisis, so all the old rules are off, and now we have to focus entirely on saving the company. That's true, of course. In our business, there's no doubt when the crisis hit and our demand dropped 95%. You can't ignore that, of course. That is the mission, is we've got to figure out how to save this company, and so that we can get through this. but it doesn't mean you throw out your values. And indeed, you should rely upon your values. Adversity reveals character, and it defines character, and it's time to define the character of your company. So, we did everything we had to do to save our company. Went and lobbied for support from the government, cut every cost we possibly could, did all the things we could, but we didn't do, for example, some of our competitors chose to change the definition of a cancellation so that they didn't need to refund the passenger's ticket. To say, the normal definition is if we can reaccommodate you within 4 hours, it's not a cancellation, it's a delay. They changed it to 24 hours. It doesn't feel right to the customer that their flight wasn't canceled if I can get you there 24 hours later or 23 hours later, whatever they did. We weren't going to do things like that. That is a cancellation. If your flight is canceled, you're entitled to a refund, as opposed to a voucher or something else. We might try to stimulate you to take a voucher because we don't have a lot of cash right now, so we'll give you more money if you take a voucher. But that's a lot different than saying we're not going to give you a refund because your flight wasn't technically canceled. We wouldn't do things like that. We did get support from the U.S. government that paid us to pay our people. And what that did essentially is keep the airline industry running. The government's giving us money to pay our team. The rules were we can't involuntarily separate anyone for 6 months, and we cannot cut their hourly rate of pay. The clear intention was that unless we can entice you to leave, you're going to get the same paycheck you got before. Some of our competitors interpreted that as, well, it says hourly rate of pay, so I can cut their hours. So if you were a 40-hour employee, now you're a 32-hour employee. That didn't seem right to us. And so we weren't going to do things like that. So yes, that would have saved us some additional cash. But that's not what we agreed to. So anyway, those types of things I think are really important in crisis, that you stick with your value system. And as long as you do that, I feel really good about how we handled situations like that, because they're going to serve us well for decades to come, not just for months to come. And maybe we could have a little more cash right now if we chose to do things that were outside our value system, but we'd be a much worse company. So I don't know. I think it's really important in times of crisis. You come back to your value system, and you keep a cool head. The values are what got you there. The values are what's going to get you through.
Yeah. So now you're kind of staring down the barrel at this furlough out on the horizon. When you think about that, what are the kind of factors that go into making that decision? How do you work that through?
Oh, I hate it. Again, part of this legislation I just tried to describe shortly. We were indeed paid to pay our team, but we were paid for 6 months. That's the funding was enough to pay airline employees for 6 months. Back in March, that we all thought that'll be sufficient, both the legislators and the industry, because we thought by then the demand would be back for air travel. This crisis would be behind us. Seems funny to say that now, but if you can put yourself back in March, that's what everybody thought.
Yep.
So October 1 was the date by which we were going to be paid. A lot of people actually said, "Oh, that's too long, even." But nonetheless, October 1 is now approaching, and so the funds are gone. Airlines now can involuntarily separate people, and we can discontinue service to communities we served before. Those were the commitments we made in exchange for the funding. So with that date fast approaching, we're now all talking about furloughs for people because demand hasn't returned. We're going to be flying in the fourth quarter less than half of the schedule that we flew in the same quarter of 2019. So we don't have enough work for all the people we have on board. We worked really hard to get as many people as we could to voluntarily agree to go to either take an early out, which about 12,000 people did, or to take a leave, paid leaves, which about 11,000 people did. But unfortunately, we have a 40,000 person overage out of 100,000 people. By the way,
right.
we're
These are big numbers.
Yeah, they're big numbers. But yeah, so I mean, and it's a big percentage of the workforce. So it's a bridge too far to try and get enough people to voluntarily leave. So yeah, we're left with like 19,000 furlough notices on October 1st. There's one chance to avoid that still, which is the government to do what I think is the right thing, which is to extend the program that made a lot of sense 6 months ago and to extend it 6 more months. We have a bipartisan support for that. That's where I'm spending, frankly, almost all my energy because I really don't want to furlough anybody. I don't think it's right. I don't think what I know is the people in the airline business, at a time the country's paralyzed with fear, are out there putting their uniforms on, going to work. making sure the country's moving, and they're going to be there when demand comes back. If we go furlough all these people, we don't just call them back the next day. Pilots take months to get back into proper seat and to be current. So anyway, we have a lot of people in D.C. that understand that. Indeed, full bipartisan support. We needed the new COVID bill, and I think we'll be in it.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, we have our two parties going to their separate corners and not working on that right now. So we're caught in the middle of that. But anyway, so we're working on that. Long answer to your question, but in short, I hate the fact that we're furloughing people. It's not, I understand why. It's what business has to do when things like this happen, but it's not the fault of those people. Indeed, they've been, first responders, for goodness sakes. And so I'm going to keep fighting, do everything I can to make sure we don't do that.
Do you have an inside view of what will bring passengers back? When you think about what the next 12 months are going to look like?
Yeah, the economy has to come back. I mean, we need people. We need people to start having a need to move. There is. I could go on at length if you'd like about how safe air travel is, and it is. So while I know there's some portion of the population who just doesn't want to get on an airplane because they're worried about being in such close proximity to someone else. That's not what's really driving the lack of demand. The problem is there's no reason to travel.
Particularly on the business side, or
particularly on business, there's virtually no business travel going on. I know at American, we have a building that holds 7,000 management people, about 500 people there a day. Right now, no one's going to come visit us. There's no reason for bankers to come to Dallas. That's in this environment. So there's no business, virtually no business travel going on. So that's obviously a big problem for our industry. But then on top of that, the leisure travel, with all these quarantine rules in place, I mean, the people that are traveling now are going to beaches, mountains, and there's a good bit of that, by the way. We are seeing really nice demand for that type of travel, but there's no demand. No one's going to Washington D.C. to go see the Smithsonian. No one's going to New York to go shop, and none of that type of leisure travel even is going on. So. Anyway, what needs to happen is our country needs to open back up. I don't know what exactly does that. I believe it's probably going to have to be a vaccine. We're seeing gradual acceptance of people just can't take it anymore and they want to get out and they're making sure they're safe and they're traveling more now. But it's to really get back to where we were. It's going to be years, I think. We're prepared for that. That's fine. But we just need to make sure that we're here. Keeping the airline running, and as demand comes back, that we're here ready to meet the demand. I think it'd be really, really unfortunate if things start to pick up and all of a sudden we can't. The engine of transportation, business transportation, isn't out there ready to take care of people.
Well, a couple of our students, Mark Cox and Lexi Tay, they, of course, noticed your long history in airlines and put two and two together and said, obviously, you were part of 911 in that whole episode, which was equally devastating at the time for airline travel and so forth. What did you learn from that? What kind of management experiences did you take away from that crisis that helped you here? And maybe how are they different? Because I'm sure they're quite different too.
I became CEO of this little airline called American Airlines, which predates most of your students. But anyway, on September 1st of 2001, so 10 days before 9/11 was my first CEO gig. And it turns out this little airline in Phoenix was in reasonably good shape, but had a financing that had been term sheets but not definitive documents, so that fell apart. So we were in as bad a financial condition as anyone. So I spent my first few months as a CEO doing something not dissimilar to what I'm doing now, which is going and trying to convince the federal government that they should help this airline. So anyway, that is, I have been through something like that before. Obviously, dramatically different circumstances, and that was a tragedy unlike any other for our business. People using the product we sell as an act of terrorism has much larger ramifications than a global pandemic to the people in our industry. But in terms of what it did to demand, For travel, it was similar, but much different than this. I mean, in 9/11, people were afraid to fly for some period of time. Those of us our age remember, but it wasn't long before TSA was stood up and cockpit doors were fortified, and so everyone knew that that same circumstance couldn't happen again. And it was, sometime 6-9 months later, full demand was back for air travel. Here we are, well past that. Like I say, we're going to be flying 50% of our traffic in the fourth quarter. Those individuals, we still have lower load factors on that 50% of the travel, so we're going to be somewhere around 40% of our traffic, and those people are paying about half the fares of prior years. We're going to be about 80% of our 80% down on revenues. So this is just kind of, and that's several months later, and who knows when it ends. So in terms of the actual ramifications of the industry, they're much deeper than 9/11 financial ramifications. So we're having to deal with that. The experience I had in 9/11 has been helpful. I mean, I've done this before.
Yeah.
It gives you at least some confidence to know, okay, here's the steps we need to take. We can get through this. We will get through this. This is, and in some sense, what's really good about this from our industry's perspective is we've gone through 9/11, again, tragedy, in addition to the tragedy, highlighted some structural weaknesses in the industry. And there were far too many airlines. We were all trying to do the same thing. Low-cost carriers were starting to just come into the business, and all that. It just accelerated this transformation that needed to happen. A bunch of bankruptcies happened. Even though the demand profile was nothing as bad as this, the structure of the business needed to get fixed, and that accelerated that. That's not what's happening here. We have done that. We do have a sound business. This is all about demand. So when demand comes back, you're not seeing serial bankruptcies in the business, even though the demand profile is much worse than 9/11 was. You're not seeing people talk about mergers and acquisitions or who's going to go away, like you heard after 9/11, or this. Finally, we're going to get this industry fixed, like we did. The industry is the U.S. industry. You're hearing some of those things, by the way, overseas, but the U.S. industry has been transformed to a level that this is all just about, okay, well, we clearly need to right size for existing demand, which is horrific, but it will come back. And when it comes back, the industry will come back in largely the same shape it's in now. We all may be smaller than we were, but we'll all be around, and eventually we'll all be back to the size we were.
Yeah. I mean, it seems to me that the airline industry in many ways was in a position to be almost the first to begin to really see this coming, right? I mean, the data that you had on ticket sales probably was the canary in the coal mine for a lot of what was coming in terms of the economy. Do you remember a moment when you realized this is going to be like a 9/11, or I mean, because it sure didn't feel that way to many of us at first, right? It felt like, we'll kind of work through this. It's not that bad, whatever.
Yes, I think we did see it a little earlier, and those of us that flew more to Asia saw it sooner than others. I remember vividly being in. We have an industry lobbying group that comprises CEOs, like all industries do. We had a meeting sometime in early February in Washington, D.C., and I remember talking to the CEO of United, and he was much more concerned about this than all of the rest of us. United flies more to China than American or Delta, and no other U.S. airline flies there except the three of us. So they'd seen more, and he was really alarmed, and we were all alarmed, but he was particularly alarmed, and he was right. So he saw it before the rest of us because they saw that data. But it just fell off a cliff as once the first cases were seen as it spread. Went to Europe all of a sudden, and then all of a sudden our flights, our traffic from Europe started to fall off. Cases started to show up in the United States. The big event, when I knew that this is not just some short-lived thing, was when I got a call telling me that in 2 hours the president's going to go on national TV and say that that you can't fly from Europe unless you're a U.S. citizen, and even then you got to fly into 1 of 10 airports where we can screen you when you land. It's like, well, that's going to have a dampening effect on demand.
This is not
that
good.
Doesn't sound like a good summer. So anyway, those types of things for an airline like ours, for global airlines, I mean, you can't possibly be profitable if we don't have people traveling overseas. and then when it hit the U.S. anyway. So yeah, anyway, yes, we had, there are a few milestones there that I remember where I think we saw it a little bit, but it happened once those kind of thing happens. It's not like it gradually falls off. Once that statement was made, everyone cancels their flights to Europe. And huge cash problem, by the way, because now we have refunds on cash we've already collected, and we have no money coming in. We went through months of just reverse bookings. That is, we had much higher refunds than we had sales, and not to mention all the expenses we had to pay for flying the airline. We were bringing in negative revenue. So that's a tough business.
That is a tough business. I think that's the definition of a tough business.
Yeah. Your losses are greater than your expenses. That's tough.
And of course, like any good O and MBA student, starting out in accounting, they hear cash is king, right? I think Jermaine Baird was teaching that in your time at Owen, and certainly we're still teaching that today, right? But you've mentioned this a couple times, and Sam Sharpstone, one of our students, was wondering about this collaboration in the industry. It's so competitive, but you do collaborate in times like this. What does that look like? Is it?
Yeah, again, we're intensely competitive and proud of it, because it's competitive business you can find. But there are things we do need to work on. One is lobbying. So we do that, and that's for the CARES Act that I talked about before was a great example of when we can all get together and work together what we can accomplish. So we do that, and the other thing we always collaborate on and never compete on is safety. So we all are in this times. You'll see each airline coming up with some sort of an initiative to help consumers understand how safe it is to fly. But we don't make them proprietary. And we're always to the extent we're allowed to, obviously. But for safety issues, we always are collaborating and sharing that information to make sure that that none of us is trying to compete on safety, because we're all safe.
Yeah. And I mean, there's so many elements of that, right? One of our students, Mario Vitro, was noting you guys were announcing some new COVID disinfectant in planes in Dallas. I assume that's kind of one of those safety things that then gets propagated around in some.
Yeah, I hope so. But again, I mean, that's a really great example. So yeah, again, part of the entire ensuring that air travel is safe, is intensive cleaning. And we've all started out, with the systems we had, just doing more of it. Then quickly, some airlines moved to these electrostatic sprays, as did we. This is a new level of that, where the EPA has approved it. This group in Dallas, SurfaceWise 2 is the name, came up with this technology where it sprays, it adheres to the surface. It literally, as if the virus lands, it punctures the membrane. So that's about as technical as I can get on it, but that's how it works. And it works for days. So you don't need to spray it every time. And it's the only one that's been approved by the EPA for this. So yeah, we at American had it first, but we're not saying, we didn't go sign up some proprietary deal with SurfaceWise 2. We want everybody else to have it. It just turns out that we're all off working our own transaction. We're all trying to figure out what's the best. They're in Dallas. We're in Dallas. So yeah. But anyway, those are the types of things that we're all doing. And as companies, as the free market finds even better solutions, some of us might be the first one to have it, but we're not. We have no desire of being the only one to have it. If that's the best technology, we all should have it.
And as you kind of look down the next 5 years, what do you think some of the things that you will have learned that will stay post-COVID? I mean, I know in my world, we're learning a lot of things.
Yeah.
I mean, I think Vanderbilt, and Owen in particular, we always pride ourselves in kind of in-person, that personal scale approach, really, our kind of close-knit culture, all these kinds of things, which of course we desperately want to propagate and bring back. We're never going to give up on that. But on the other hand, that also meant that we weren't spending as much time maybe as some schools thinking about how we could do this. Have conversations remotely and virtually and so forth. And we're learning a lot, and I'm sure it'll forever change Vanderbilt, Owen, higher education in general. Are there things like that, do you feel, for airlines, that the things that will be around post-COVID?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, look, as horrible as all this is, I mean, one thing that's a positive is that this has given us the chance to take what was the largest airline in the world and essentially shut it down and only build back what makes sense. I mean, what an amazing opportunity. We always, we would do like big companies do, have this, $50 billion organization, and then go do a budget exercise around what we're going to add or take away from the 50 billion, as opposed to starting with a zero company as a startup almost and build back what makes sense. So we have this great opportunity now, where we really we're only flying what makes sense right now. When you only fly half your schedule, you're flying the best routes. And as we keep adding back, we should get to what really, and it gives you a chance to think about all that. How do we price the product? We have this thing called basic economy, which is meant to only apply to those customers who only care entirely about price. It's a product that is there, and then we sell up from it. Well, that same structure in today's world is selling like 75% of the airplane. That's not what it's designed to do. So anyway, the pricing structure you start thinking about differently. Where you fly, you start thinking about differently. What you have in the product, the technology that we're giving customers. So much more of what we can do now is designed around, as you just said, for your online classes. Everything we have to communicate with our customers in such a different way, and a lot of it's more efficient. So anyway, this is a great opportunity for us to go and just, the way we describe it is like this is like a yellow flag on the racetrack, and we'd gone through this merger and we had kind of lost some ground. The American U.S. Airways merger over the last few years, those things slow you down. And we'd gotten our car to where we were as fast as everybody, but we were maybe a lap behind. Well, here's a yellow flag. And the yellow flag, we all get next to each other. And we're going to use this time to get our car in really great shape. And when the green flag drops, we're going to be off and running faster than anybody. And we're excited about that opportunity. So there's all sorts of opportunities like that. I don't know exactly what they're all going to be, Eric. But that's what we're going to use this time for. We're going to make ourselves as fast as we possibly can be, more efficient. And I think we took 30% of our management team out because we had to, but that's going to be good. We got 70% as many. We got 30% fewer people than we had before, and they've got just as much work, and indeed probably more, and it's different work. So we're figuring out ways to work more efficiently and faster. So I don't know. I am excited about those things. It's hard to get too excited about right in the middle of it, but it's also what keeps you going and motivated. Just thinking about when that green flag drops. We've all got to be sure we're ready, and it gets you excited about the work you're doing today.
Yeah. I mean, do you think it'll cause focus? Like, for example, credit card business, some of these kinds of things, or do you think that those will be maybe even more exciting in the future? Some of those auxiliary businesses.
Yeah, again, it's hard to tell. Nothing about this really feels like a transformation in our business. And again, I don't want to make it sound just as though I'm got my head in the sand or anything's going to go back to where it was. I know it's going to be different, but it's not. None of this. People talk about, oh gosh, aren't you worried about Zoom? People won't travel as much because now they can do it through Zoom. A long time ago, I heard a legendary guy in our business, a guy named Bob Crandall, who was the CEO of American, when asked about the internet, say, it's been, his answer was, it's been my experience that anything that makes the world smaller results in more demand for global air travel. And he's right. So the internet resulted in more travel, not less. Video conferencing in the 90s resulted in more travel, not less. I think Zoom will do the same thing. I think anything that makes people easier to connect people makes them eventually want to have a real connection, makes them want to see other sites, and makes it necessary for them to connect person to person. So I'm not worried about demand for air travel. Will the business model change? Perhaps, but the reason the credit card business works so well is because people really like to get miles for travel for the same reason. They like to use their card and get something that's rather than getting cash back, a lot of people choose to have mileage cards because they view that as a better utility for what they're buying. I don't know what changes that as long as there's demand for air travel. So anyway, there certainly will be the way we communicate with customers, the way we present the product. We've developed touchless kiosk and things. Who would have thought that was something we would need to put at the top of our IT list 6 months ago?
Yeah.
So we'll do all those things, and we're going to need to adapt to the new world. But as long as it's unless there's a change in physics that makes it where you can't be transported digitally, people and as long as there's demand for people to go see the world, our model is awfully efficient right now.
That's great. Well, of course, a lot of our students are wondering what you learned at Owen that you kind of took with you in your career from your time here, and things that you thought were important, not class or whatever, Jermaine Bear or something like that, but what you thought you took away from your own experience.
Yeah, well, not to dismiss what I learned, because I did learn a lot. I mean, it was that, which is helpful. But you're right. That's not that's not what comes top of mind when I think about it. What I know the answer is it's relationships, and the relationships that I formed here with people still exist today. I learned from I spent 2 years here with some really smart people, my classmates, and learned from them and was inspired by them, have been inspired by them, and remain and continue to be so as we progress. Those relationships are just that's what Owen did for me. Is it taught me the value of relationships in business, and we all talk about that, but until you get out there and really realize how important that is, it's a lot different actually than the classroom. And Owen does a nice job of making sure the undergrad can have this kind of, I don't know, maybe not all, but at least my experience was, it was much less collaborative. It was more individual, and you can get yourself kind of in this cutthroat kind of, you're my competitor as opposed to my colleague, and that's not what business is like. I think people think that's what it's like, but when you're out there, what you realize is business is all about relationships, and you need to be the person that people want to work with, the person people want to work for, the person that can work with others, the person that can take teams of people and get them motivated to go work on something together. And those that go around and try and figure out how they're going to backstab somebody else, that might work for 2 years of your career, but it's going to catch up with you and you're done. Anyway, and Owen did a really nice job, at least for me, of teaching that, and it helped me when I started. It's helped me ever since. And again, some of my very best friends in the world are the people that I went to school with here in 1986, for God's sakes.
That's great. Yep. That's great. Well, certainly, given that you've been in the airline industry your whole career pretty much, right, I got to believe that you can't be backstabbing in there too much because everybody knows everybody, right?
Right. Exactly. It's and again, the other thing you realize is, and I've realized is, people that try and figure, okay, well, I get that relationships matter, so I'm going to go, that guy's important, that woman's important, I'm going to try and get to know them. That doesn't work. Because what you really realize is you have no idea over the course of a career what relationships are going to matter. It's impossible to try and figure it out. And if you do, you're going to get yourself in trouble too, because if you're focusing your attention on someone you think is important, that means you're focusing less attention on someone else. And what I learned through mergers and all sorts of things, you just can't imagine how many people you come across who your paths crossed 20 years ago. And they're now important to you, because they're representing people you need on your side. And if they're telling those people, these people you can trust, that makes a really big difference. So the real answer is you go do trustworthy things all the time. You treat everybody with respect, and you be the person people want to work with and for, and that'll serve you well. Then you don't have to worry about who's important and who's not. Just go treat everybody the way you'd like to be treated, and do so with. Like I say, with real respect, and because I assure you, if you don't do that, you're gonna find yourself one day thinking, "Oh God, I wish I'd been nicer to that person," because they're really important to me right now. And I should. How did I miss that? So it's a lot easier just not have those thoughts.
Yeah. And I think when I introduced you, we were talking about the great class of '86. One of the reasons it's great, I think, is I have seen these beach pictures of families
Yeah.
5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30 years later, what drove that? There was a core group of you that just kept getting together, huh?
Yeah, again, I don't know if that's different than others, but yeah, no, we just found this really close group of friends. We worked a lot on projects. I don't know. Owen back then was one of the few schools that would take people straight out of school, or one of the few top schools that would do that. And most of us that in that group you're talking about were kind of had only either worked 1 year or no, in my case, just went straight through. So we were still single, young, pretty much still like we were an undergrad, but just at a higher level. So I don't know, it all kind of gelled, and we established these really strong relationships as individual friends, and then as we gotten families and things, we stuck together.
That's great. Yeah. Well, I think I always ask everyone that comes through here to share one leadership lesson along the way, maybe something that's relevant to you now, or just maybe something that's just been kind of timeless across your career. Is there a lesson you'd like to share with the students? You've shared a lot.
I was going to say, I feel like I'm sharing more.
Put you on the spot.
Yeah, no, that's all right. No, look, the one I generally give for that is relationships matter, which I just tried to do. I mean, they really do, and it's you just can't stress it enough. You need to understand that business is a team sport, and it's individual contributors can get to a certain level, but if you really want to have influence and get responsibility, you need to understand it's a team sport. So anyway, what I'll tell you is this, which I think is helpful. For at least from my perspective on my career. I graduated Owen, went to work for American Airlines in 1986, progressed through the industry in this kind of roundabout way that you described, for the first, up until 2001, so 15 years, by looking to, what's my next job? Managing my career. That's what I was doing. I'm not ashamed to admit it, nothing wrong with that. I was competitive. I wanted to get more and more responsibility. I wanted to be able to take care of my family. So that's what I did. I took a job. I fought hard to get promoted, early. I chose to move to my new wife to Minneapolis, Minnesota from Dallas to go work for Northwest because they offered me a bigger opportunity. All those things worked, and then ended up as CFO of America West, similar way as in Phoenix. But in 2001, I found myself having to save a company, and in doing so, flying back from DC, working on that, went and talked to a flight attendant in the back of the airplane who said to me, how's it going? And I couldn't lie to her. It wasn't going well. I said, it's not going that well. She says, well, what's that mean? I said, well, if we can't get this loan, we're going to liquidate. And she just looks at me and says, you can't do that. I've been doing this job for 15 years. I'm a single mother. I have I won't be able to replicate this income anywhere else. No airlines are hiring. This is my lifestyle. You can't let that happen. So anyway, long story short, that changed the way I thought about my job ever since. I stopped worrying about my career, because before I talked to her, I was sitting there thinking the same thing about myself. I've been CEO for 3 months, and this is going to look terrible on the resume. I was CEO, then we liquidated. That doesn't look good. Where am I going to go? So, but I went and sat down. These people, they're dependent upon me getting this company saved, and we'd been told that what I knew and didn't tell her. We'd been told no. But I looked at the letter again, and it said, we can't approve your application at this time. So we went and worked on weekend, showed back up in DC on Monday, and said, we're back. And they said, well, didn't you get our letter? And we said, yeah, but it said at this time. That was 2 days ago. Here's another one. We're not going away. And we didn't go away, and we got it done. And since that time, that's what I've been working. Honestly, I haven't taken I never took a recruiter call, never worried about my career again, because all I was worried about was my responsibility to those people. And once I did that, my career took off. I went from being nearly liquidating America West Airlines 3 months later to getting, merging America West and U.S. Airways and being named the CEO of U.S. Airways, merging U.S. Airways and American and being named the CEO of American. That wasn't because I was managing my career. That's because I was trying to get those other people into safe harbor. And that's what drove all of us. And so if you can find something that's bigger than yourself, and it's easy to say, not that easy to do. But once I found, my job, a mission that was bigger than me, not worrying about my career was fine. But I couldn't give up on that flight attendant. And I couldn't give up on people like her, who I knew that if we let U.S. Airways, go the way people thought it was going to go, they would not be in safe harbor. So anyway, that's what's really bad about where we are now. Because once we get the American deal done, I really knew we had that safe harbor. We had the largest airline in the world. American Airlines isn't going away, and yet here we find ourselves now in this. We're not going anywhere, but we may be furloughing people, and it just makes me sick to my stomach. So that's why we're working so hard to make sure even that doesn't happen. If it does, we're going to bring them back because demand's going to return. But I really want to get to where we don't do that. But anyway, this long way of me saying. If you can figure out a way to find what you're doing has a purpose bigger than yourself. Nothing wrong with working for yourself. Nothing wrong with building your career. Those are important things, particularly because you can be doing that for someone else. But if you can figure out a way to find a job where you really know what you're doing is for others, your career does better even.
Well, Doug, thank you so much for taking the time to join us here in the library at Vanderbilt.
I love what you've done to the place.
In a very different time, in a very different place, but with some timeless lessons for our students. And I think everyone certainly walks away with some really interesting thoughts that you shared with us. So thanks so much, Doug.
Thanks, Eric. Thanks for what you're doing.
And thank you. Have a great weekend, everybody.